Many people are aware that Tokyo is home to two Disney parks, Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea. But what many people don't realize is that Tokyo is home to many unique and interesting theme parks, and one of them has some very strong similarities to Disney's Epcot park at Walt Disney World in Florida. The park I'm talking about is Yomiuriland. Roller coaster enthusiasts will likely be aware that the park is home to the iconic 1988 Togo coaster Bandit, but the park has changed a lot since then, and it's taken more than one page out of Epcot's book. So hang around as I break down how Yomiuriland brought Epcot to Japan. At a glance, it seems like Yomiuriland has one reason to visit: Bandit. The record-breaking roller coaster, the fastest in the world when it opened, is certainly one of a kind, and seeing Tokyo City in the distance before plummeting downwards and hurtling through the trees is easily worth the ticket price alone, especially in the summer when they add water cannons, and during their winter Jewelluminations event when those water cannons are replaced with flame jets. If you look at the area of the park surrounding Bandit, you'll see a relatively mediocre amusement park which is very similar to other Japanese regional parks. Areas that were once brightly coloured but haven't seen proper upkeep, dated flat rides, and a lack of significant additions in recent decades make many Japanese amusement parks feel like a sad reminder of the stagnation of the Japanese economy. But Yomiuriland seemed to have discovered a solution to this problem. Sure, you'll see a lot of these symptoms as you walk around the bottom half of Yomiuriland, but what makes the park stand out, and what makes it so similar to Epcot, is that in recent years the park has been developing another half of the park, with a huge emphasis on corporate sponsorships. Ride sponsorships in theme parks are hardly anything new, and can be seen everywhere from Six Flags parks to Blackpool Pleasure Beach and even in the Disney parks. In fact, in the early days of Disneyland, sponsors helped to build the park's Tomorrowland by providing the funds necessary to build attractions in the land, and in return asking for control of those exhibits, essentially turning them into giant advertisements. This strategy became part of Disney's arsenal for how they invest in the parks, and in the late 70s, when Disney had their largest, most ambitious and most expensive project ever, Epcot Center, the strategy of utilizing corporate sponsorships was absolutely essential to getting the park built. And it ended up forming a huge part of the park's DNA. The companies would want a lot of say in what their attractions would look like, but the relationship between Imagineering and these third-party sponsors would result in some of the most beloved attractions in Disney Parks history. This is exactly what gives Yomiuriland an air of 80s Epcot. It's very clear that the park has worked very closely with the companies to deliver rides that feel like giant advertisements. This may sound like a disaster, but the result is some very quirky rides and the park having higher budgets to spend on these attractions, just as it was on Epcot's opening day. The reason I think the park is able to pull this off so well is that Japanese guests are typically far more optimistic about big business than their Western counterparts. I think this used to be more present in the West, particularly in America, but anyway, this results in guests being genuinely excited to see the brands plastered all over the park. The half of the park filled with these sponsored attractions is called Good Jobba, or Good Job, and it feels so distinct from the other side of the park. This is partly as their water park is in between those two areas, but also because this area is just much more modern and it's full of indoor attractions with huge show buildings that would seem really out of place in the amusement side of the park. The indoor attractions not only make the developments more comfortable for nearby residents, but they also give the attractions some unique opportunities for interesting and immersive experiences. Good Job is where Yomiuriland stands out from the crowd. The land is split into factories, which are each sponsored by a different company, not unlike the pavilions of Epcot or indeed the World's Fairs which inspired Disney to begin with. There's Car Factory, sponsored by Nissan, Food Factory, sponsored by Nissin, who make instant noodles, Fashion Factory, sponsored by Shimaseki, who make computerized flat knitting machines, Bungyu, or Stationery Factory, sponsored by Kokuyo, who make, stationery, and the most recent addition, Space Factory, sponsored by Taisho Pharmaceutical Holdings. And if you're wondering what the connection is between space and pharmaceuticals, here is the official backstory on the Yomiuriland website. Taisho Pharmaceutical has launched their factory on the moon, where they're using the moon's unique environment to develop medicine. Honestly, this whole thing is just bonkers, so feel free to pause the video right here and give it a read if you want. So let's start off at the car factory, When you enter the building, you'll be greeted by a futuristic sports car, but if you arrive at the right time, you'll see this vehicle transform in front of your eyes into a giant robot. Come back half an hour later and you'll see the whole thing in reverse. Keep walking ahead and you'll get to the car factory's standout attraction, Custom Garage. This slow-moving car ride may seem pretty uninteresting as it's a family ride with not much to look at, but what makes this ride unique is the interactive element. Before getting into the vehicle, you're given an electric drill and a time limit to physically attach different components onto your ride vehicle before taking a test drive to test its endurance and capabilities, which may sound familiar if you've ever ridden Epcot's test track. If you take a right turn after you enter the building, you'll see some video games where you can design your own vehicle and take it for a test drive, just to really hammer home those test track comparisons. Before you even enter the food factory, the first thing you'll notice is a giant kettle pouring boiling hot water over screaming guests. Okay, it actually stops before they get to it, and the water's probably not boiling hot, but my version's better. When you enter the building, you'll be given the choice of 3 experiences. Turn left for an interesting dual joystick-controlled dodgems ride. Straight ahead to make your own custom instant noodles, add your own design to the packaging, and then put it inside a balloon for some reason. Or turn right for this factory's main event, Splash UFO. If you're visiting Japan and you're hoping to find some really out there and quirky experiences, this one will not disappoint. You'll board a UFO brand instant noodle pot before making your way up a climb hill to see how their noodles are made, until suddenly the evil supervillain Kettler attacks you with his giant fork and tries to gobble you up. The button on each of the lap bars can be used to attack Kettler by firing noodles up at him into the screens above the vehicle, before progressing and eventually conquering this most dastardly of foes. This ride always puts a huge smile on my face, and it's just amazing to see a park on the scale of Yomiuriland pull this kind of thing off. We'll now take a look at Fashion Factory, which is home to one of Good Job's 2 roller coasters. But before you even see the ride, you'll take a tour of this whimsical and beautiful cartoonish sewing factory. With the best theming in the park, this queue is just delightful, from the music and interactive exhibits to the authentic button art and the giant cat hiding right above you. The queue and station also include the park's mascot, Good. That's his name is Good, but I do also think it's good that he's in the ride, so Good. The name's not very good. Once you get on the coaster, you'll go through a fun and whimsical dark ride section in which you'll help Good with his sewing by pressing the button on your lap bar to interact with physical sets, before heading up a spiral lift hill and into the fun but kind of brief indoor spinning coaster section. This ride is an absolute joy from the moment you enter the queue, and again really seems to transcend the park that it calls home. Once the ride is finished, you'll head into a room where you're given the choice to create your own custom wristbands or burn some calories on a treadmill, rowing machine or electric bike to power a sewing machine, which will return the favour by giving you a custom wristband with your initials on it. This one is actually included in the admission, which makes it stand out, and it's also the least popular for some reason, so I highly recommend it if you've got the energy. Next up is Stationery Factory, and whilst it doesn't have a standout ride, it does have some really sweet interactive experiences that are very unique and a lot of fun. The first is their indoor team challenge, which has several different stages and tests your skills by getting you to spin multiple rolls of paper, move a platform to get the ball into the goal, and press buttons in a time limit, to name a few. Outside, but still part of Stationery Factory, lies a favourite of me and my family, Tamagoro, or ball coaster as they like to call it in English. This thing is so cool even just to look at, as it's this enormous Rube Goldberg-style contraption which is sending balls all over the place. But it's also a competitive game in which 2 large teams go head-to-head to get the higher score through various mini-games and getting as many balls through the various puzzles and obstacles. Stationery Factory does have a few little flat rides as well, with some cute stationery themes like erasers, rulers and crayons. And there's our buddy Good again, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. The newest factory, which opened in November 2021, is Space Factory. Whilst this also has a family drop tower on the outside, the attraction you'll notice first is the family inverted coaster from Gerstlauer, Lipovitan Rocket Luna. Like Spin Runway, the actual layout of the coaster isn't anything to write home about, but the projections and effects inside and interactive element more than make up for it. The interactive element I'm talking about? To defeat all of the dullies and save Lipovitan Girl, we have to shout as loud as possible to get a high score, which somehow destroys the dullies and saves her? Anyway, this results in hearing some unusually loud sounds coming from this family roller coaster. Whilst I said the layout doesn't offer much, it does have that Space Mountain effect of being in the dark, and that means that the drops really come out of nowhere, which can be quite a thrilling experience. Space Factory is also home to a simulated medicine-making experience, in which guests can choose a design and create their own piece of candy that, and I quote, look like real medicine pills. Putting the questionability of giving kids candy that looks like pills to one side, you may have noticed that each of these factory pavilions is home to one or more rides, and they're all interactive in different ways. In the car factory, you have the electric drill and you can attach different parts to the vehicle. In the food factory, you get to battle the evil supervillain Kettler by pushing a button to blast noodles in his stupid face. In Fashion Factory's Spin Runway, there are buttons to interact with the scenes and trigger effects. The Stationery Factory has some standard flat rides, but they all involve pedaling, climbing, or pressing something. And in Space Factory, there's the suspended coaster, which measures how loud you scream and gives you a score at the end. As if the Epcot influence wasn't already clear enough, there's even a transport ride which weaves through each of the areas, itself fitted with an AR game that uses cameras attached to the vehicle to look out for cartoon baddies walking amongst the guests and apprehend them. The ride being sponsored by Alsoc, who specialise in security systems. Not only are the rides interactive, but they all have an interactive post-show element too. In the Car Factory, you can design your own vehicle, then race it in a video game. In the Food Factory, you can make your own custom instant noodles, which are far more popular and more delicious than you might expect. In the Fashion Factory, you use the bikes, treadmills, and rowing machines to power the sewing machine. In Stationery Factory, there are the team games I talked about earlier, and there's also something for the really young kids where they can draw a picture, put it under a scanner, and then see it immediately pop into a frame, which is really neat. And then of course there's Space Factory getting kids to make medicine for fun. These experiences really help to make each of these factories into much more than just a ride, but a memorable experience, which I think benefits the guests, the parks, and the companies who sponsor the attractions. Some of the experiences have a small upcharge, so there's a bit of money to be made there, but I honestly think that this kind of hands-on experience with a brand or product really helps to create a connection with the consumers. Many say that the reason Disney don't create these kinds of experiences anymore is because brands can simply use social media to interact with their customers immediately, so they don't have the appetite to spend all this money on building rides and things. But there's something far more real and tactile about a lived experience of interacting positively with a brand on a day out. But much more important than any of that, it leads to some really out there and creative thinking for attraction designers too. Do you really think Yomiuriland would have come up with a rapids ride where you're a bowl of instant noodles and a maniacal supervillain is trying to stir you up with a fork if it wasn't being sponsored by an instant noodle company? Now, do I want every attraction to essentially be an advert for some large corporation whose main goal is to sell their product? No, of course I don't, but I think Yomiuriland proves that this can still be a recipe for success, and this is clearly working for them, as they've doubled down on this concept time and time again. And these rides are hugely popular with guests, who you'll see happily walking around the park with their custom noodles and pill-shaped candy. One other way that the park could be compared to Epcot is that it's often the canvas for seasonal events, their largest and most popular being Jewelluminations, when the park is filled, and I mean filled, with twinkling lights. I'll probably do an entire video on this event at some point because the scale is honestly breathtaking and I'd love to share that with you. The park also invites tons of third-party food vendors in food trucks during this time, which really adds to the festival atmosphere and makes it so much fun to be there. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe so you don't miss future Japanese theme park videos, or watch another one right now. Thanks so much to my patrons B and the Sabaran family for supporting the channel and helping make these videos possible.